Hi friends, welcome back or welcome if you're new here. My name is Stacy and I am the Chapter Conundrum. And in today's video, I want to talk to you guys about some things that I do not enjoy in books. Things that I have come across many times that have not really worked for me. So while this video might be a bit more negative, I'm hoping that it can help some of you kind of pinpoint maybe why a book didn't work as well for you. And it will also kind of help explain my reading tastes a little bit more as well. Definitely why certain books may end up on my least favorites or most disappointing. And I'm also hoping that in sharing this list, you guys can help maybe save me some pain and tell me what popular books to avoid based on what I have to say. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into it. And the first element of a book that pretty much always makes me angry when I read it is anything involving dreams. This is kind of a bit interesting to explain. So for me, I don't visualize very well. I would say I have some degree of aphantasia. And to me, when I do visualize, it does not feel realistic. It's not the same experience as looking at something. And that also carries into how I dream. I don't always see my dreams. But anyway, for me, that makes it very different from reality. And so when a book tries to kind of play dreams as important, I don't vibe because I don't really understand the experience of having dreams that are so realistic that they could be confused with reality. I'm always frustrated when a character kind of trusts their dream information in some way. I'm frustrated when dreams are used to communicate with dead characters because it lowers the stakes for me, and I'm just like, I want to feel their death if you've killed them off. I want to be emotional about this. I don't want to have them coming back in a dream to communicate. And then probably the most egregious one of all is when an author does, and it was all just a dream at the end. Nothing is going to make me feel like the experience of reading that book has been cheapened more than that trope. I hate it. I don't even understand the appeal of it, to be honest. But there are popular books that do it, and people enjoy it. I can't say I understand. Maybe somebody can explain why they enjoy this if they do, but for me, no, not it. So along the lines of not really visualizing while I read, another thing that I really struggle with in books is when an author describes everything. I really don't like lengthy chunks of description. Short chunks are great. Things that give me a sense of the environment and the character and their situation, all great. But when you have pages and pages and pages of description and the appeal of your book is really giving someone an immersive experience, that is just not going to work for me. Like, I find myself zoning out a lot of the time when I'm reading or listening to lengthy chunks of description, and I just get frustrated because I want relevant plot details. I kind of like sense a book more through its plot and its tension. And so those are kind of the equivalent for me personally of a better way to kind of get me immersed. And so yeah, description chunks are not it. So some examples of books that I can think of that kind of fall into this would be like The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern or Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. I got like 20 minutes into this and I just could not because I felt like I was just wading through all the description to get to things I was interested in. So yeah, sadly, there are some really popular books that I just can't get interested in reading because of the amount of description they have. I think another aspect of things that I don't like in books can also sort of be explained why I don't necessarily visualize, and I think that is because I more sense a book's tension. And so for me, a big thing that does not tend to work for me is magical realism. And there are kind of some reasons for that. So a couple of the hallmarks of magical realism is that things usually aren't very well explained in terms of the magic or what's happening. And also characters tend to kind of be sort of nonchalant about the magic or what's happening. They're not really reacting to it as much as I would like them to. And I think for me that's tricky because that really takes away a lot of how I experience tension in a story. And so if I'm not seeing it and I'm not really feeling the ramifications of it as much as I want, it tends to not keep my interest very well. I also tend to prefer things that are very logical, and magical realism tends to stray from that. Now, I will say I have found an exception to this rule where I have found a magical realism book that I really enjoyed, and that was The Astonishing Color of After by Emily X.R. Pan. But I think the reasons that it worked for me is because it didn't necessarily play into those elements that are typical in magical realism. You definitely have a character that is letting you in on their experience of this magic, and you also definitely have some kind of very loose rules as to how this magic is occurring, at least for one of the magical elements of the story. And for those reasons, it worked for me. But I have yet to come across another example of magical realism that really worked for me. And I think another aspect to why it maybe doesn't is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the magical aspect of the story can kind of come in and conveniently solve plot points. And I don't love that. I love when a character has to struggle to figure out how to resolve something. And I enjoy reading kind of like their emotional journey on how they're going to do that. So those are several reasons that magical realism just tends to not work for me. So another thing that kind of relates to what we've been discussing so far is a character who either never pins down fully what they're experiencing, or one that takes forever to kind of pin down what they're experiencing. And I find this most egregious for me and most annoying for me when I'm reading horror. Like, I want spooky things to be tangible. I want to feel afraid for them because I know roughly what situation they're in or roughly what they're experiencing. But if you have a situation where it's like a child experiencing something scary and they're not really explaining what's going on for them, it doesn't even have to be like a full explanation of actually like what's happening. It's just more like when they're not explaining to you why they're feeling the way they're feeling. Like, you can have horror where a child is describing like how terrified they are, but not really get a grasp of like what they're experiencing. And that is usually a real struggle for me. So like a perfect example of this would be Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky. And this makes Jake sad because this is one of his all-time favorite horror books. But definitely this is a case of a child experiencing something spooky, not really explaining what the heck is happening. And furthermore, the writing style in this leads to more confusion, because I actually did a buddy read of this when I read it, and there were sections of the text that my buddy and I interpreted completely differently. Like, we both thought something different had happened, and so I went back and I read the text, and it was really open to interpretation either way. So just stuff like that that kind of lends to a spooky book or a horror book in particular kind of being a little bit intangible just doesn't work for me. So to kind of further that point, I would say anything that can kind of be described as like wishy-washy or timey-wimey, or just books that kind of give me the vibe that they're going to feel that way based on how other people describe them. So, you know, something like Piranesi would be a perfect example of this. Like, I can already tell based on the way people talk about this, that is not going to be a book for me that I love. So another one that I've already kind of hinted at or touched on, or maybe that you could infer from what I've mentioned so far, is any kind of trope or situation that really lowers the stakes. So think along the lines of things like the resurrection trope. Like, I don't like when this is used, and I don't think I'm alone in that one, but I just feel like I wish authors who had the courage to kill off their characters would just have them stay gone. Like, I don't want communication with them in a seance or a dream. I don't want them to come back to life. I want to feel the loss, and I want to be emotional for the story and the other characters remaining in it. I don't necessarily need a happy ending. I just want to feel something. So another example of maybe a story that will kind of fit into this, like something is kind of lowering the stakes, could be like a romance story that tries to introduce a tense plot, but that you know is not really going anywhere because you know how it ends, given that it's marketed as a romance. So think things like Something Wilder by Christina Lauren. That one did not work for me because of that. And then to kind of further into this, authors that tend to consistently have everyone be okay, everyone have a happy ending, and just everything work out and get wrapped up in a neat little bow. Like, I can enjoy reading those stories, but at a certain point, especially if I'm reading many books by them or a long series by them, I stop feeling afraid for the characters and the situations they're put in, and I stop feeling the tension. It's just kind of like, okay, well, we know this is going to turn out all right. So like, I'm not really invested or on the edge of my seat while I'm reading it. So yeah, I would say I don't necessarily hate authors that do that. I just tend to find that they're never my all-time favorites. And also that kind of plays into why I'm so hesitant to pick up cozy fantasy. Maybe somebody who's read cozy fantasy can kind of elaborate in the comments and tell me, is this something I kind of have the wrong impression about? Like, is there something in cozy fantasy that makes it kind of play into things I like? Or do I have kind of the correct impression that a lot of it is going to be creating an atmosphere and intended to kind of be an immersive experience with lower stakes where you aren't worried for the characters at all? So yeah, let me know down below in the comments if you have an opinion or thoughts to add on that. So another thing that really tends to not work for me is books, especially books that are supposed to have tension, that have kind of a repetitive plot element. So things that kind of come up over and over, or like one thing that conveniently solves kind of like all the problems the characters run into in the book. So kind of two examples that I can think of that sort of do this are The Martian by Andy Weir. I remember feeling like at the end of this book that if I heard the words potato or rover one more time, I was going to lose my marbles. Like, I was over it. I needed something different to be going on in that book. And while it's a good story that's enjoyable, it just got tedious for me. Another example of a thriller that kind of does this, where there's an element of the book that sort of conveniently is the solution to many issues, is No Exit by Taylor Adams. And I'm not going to tell you what that element was in case you haven't read it, because I don't want to kind of like spoil it or lower the stakes for you going in. I just remember reading it feeling like, okay, if this element comes into play one more time, I'm DNFing. Like, I'm over this. I don't even care what's happening anymore because I know how it's going to be solved. And I was sad about it in that instance because it otherwise is a very good book. I appreciate so much more when an author can be creative with their resolutions and plot solutions, less convenient, and just less predictable too. To kind of piggyback off that, I also just don't like when plot solutions or reveals are just very convenient. Things that really make you suspend your disbelief, or things that are just like, oh, yeah, okay. I don't love that kind of experience in my reading either. It can be really frustrating to have a problem that's like so built up and seems so intricate, and then just have one thing kind of like come in and just easily solve everything and fix it all. I want the payoff of a nuanced solution when a book builds something up that much for me. And I think that this is partly why I kind of struggle sometimes with soft magic in a book. Not always, but I find often in fantasy with soft magic that the magic sort of comes in and just solves all the plot points and just makes things convenient for the characters. I appreciate more when a character struggles and when I get to kind of have theories about how it's going to work out or how they're going to get themselves out of this pickle. So yeah, unfortunately, just convenient plot solutions aren't it for me either. So another thing that tends to really ruin a thriller for me is just when things are illogical. When I have to suspend too much disbelief, or when I'm not really buying a character's theories on how something is going. Like, if I have the experience of thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, that's not actually possible because of this, or if I just have a situation where I'm like, this is too far-fetched, then that is going to definitely lower my rating and enjoyment of a book. So definitely a thriller that seemed very illogical for me and that I couldn't really suspend disbelief for would be like The Echo Wife by Sarah Gailey. This one deals with cloning, and you're getting explanations of like how this cloning is happening, and that's not what I wanted because I didn't buy it. Like, if I had just had a reading experience more of just reading about the clones and how it was causing chaos, I would have probably enjoyed it. But because we delved into logic that I saw flaws in, I just couldn't get with it. And then the last sort of thing that really tends to kind of like, ooh, that's not for me, is something that's very literary or just very character focused. Now, I can really enjoy and appreciate a character focused book if the character is very emotional and reactive about what they are experiencing, or if you really feel like you're on a journey with that character and you understand kind of the aspects of that they're struggling with, then I can love it. But it gets very frustrating for me to read a character-focused book where the character has more energy and just enthusiasm in describing to you what they had for breakfast versus what they're dealing with and struggling with. And so a super popular example that comes to mind where I just struggled was Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Like, this is a series that is so character focused and so focused on Fitz, but it was just so frustrating for me to read at times. And I think particularly in this book, maybe I won't have this issue later in the series, but because he's so young and because he's not really understanding like the ramifications of what's going on around him, or he's not really understanding why something is scary or why something is tense, he is just more excited to tell you about like what he's eating for breakfast than he is in telling you like some of the bigger political issues or like what the villains in this series are doing. And then to pile on even more, this definitely had some instances where we got a reveal that I was like, hold up, that doesn't really make sense because of XYZ. So either like somebody in here is not reliable, or there just is not enough explanation to make this make sense yet. So yeah, this is a series I actually do want to go back and try because I have a feeling that some of my complaints will be resolved a little bit more in later books. I know that because it's such a long series, there will probably be more explanation and payoff in later books. And once Fitz is older, I have a feeling we'll probably get a better sense of how he's feeling and how he's kind of understanding and grasping things that are happening around him and not just kind of ignoring it or not enthusiastic about it. But yeah, there are definitely moments that happen in this story that are written in a way that are so subtle that you can almost miss what's happening. And a lot of the time you're sort of expected to put your own emotion onto the situation instead of kind of like taking in what their emotion is. And so yeah, that's kind of why it didn't work as well for me as I wanted. But yeah, let me know down below in the comments if my suspicions are right, whether this series is worth continuing and whether you think I'll have a bit of a better time with some of the later stuff in it, because it is wildly popular and I want to love it, but like my experience with it so far was just not it. So those were some of the things that I do not appreciate in books and in my reading experience. Let me know down below in the comments if I have kind of like helped put anything into words for you that maybe you also experienced but didn't know how to pinpoint before. And also let me know if there are other popular books that sort of fit into these things that I probably shouldn't read. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe on your way out if you want to, and have a great day. Bye.